Rise of the Crescent: How the Ottoman Empire Began. Before an empire rises, the world must first shift. This is the story of how a single frontier warrior, Osman, sparked the birth of one of the longest-lasting empires in history. But to understand Osman, we must first understand the world he inherited, a world shaped by two falling giants, the Byzantines and the Seljuks. Who were the Byzantines? The Byzantines were the people of the Byzantine Empire, the last surviving part of the ancient Roman Empire. They were ancient, wealthy, but weakening civilization, holding much of Western Anatolia, the Asian part of Turkey. For more than 1,000 years, they ruled much of southeastern Europe, Western Asia, and the eastern Mediterranean. Their capital, Constantinople, was a city of soaring churches, marble walls, and golden domes. They saw themselves as Romans, but their culture blended Roman laws, Greek language, and Christian traditions. Their empire was powerful, at least in earlier centuries, but by the late 1200s, when Osman lived, the Byzantines were weak, divided, and shrinking. Civil wars, invasions, and economic struggles had carved huge chunks out of their territory. These were the major cities and regions of the Byzantine Empire: Western Anatolia and coastal cities, Constantinopolis, Istanbul, Turkey; Nicomedia, Izmit, Turkey; Nicaea, Iznik, Turkey; Prusa, Bursa, Turkey; Smyrna, Izmir, Turkey; Ephesus, near Seljuk, Turkey; Pergamum, Bergama, Turkey; Attaleia, Antalya, Turkey; Miletus, near Balat, Turkey; Halicarnassus, Bodrum, Turkey; Sardis, near Sart, Turkey; Philadelphia, Alaşehir, Turkey; Chonai, Hanaz, Turkey; Central Anatolian Plateau, Dorylaeum, near Eskişehir, Turkey; Ankara, Ankara, Turkey; Iconium, Konya, Turkey; Caesarea, Kayseri, Turkey; Tiana, Kemirhisar, Turkey; Amorium, near Emirdag, Turkey; Pessinus, Balhisar, Turkey; Colossae, near Hanaz, Turkey; Black Sea Coast, Pontus; Trebizond, Trabzon, Turkey; Sinope, Sinop, Turkey; Amisus, Samsun, Turkey; Heraclea, Pontica; Karadeniz, Airegli, Turkey; Eastern Frontier and Armenian Highlands, Theodosiopolis, Erzurum, Turkey; Manzikert, Malazgirt, Turkey; Arzen, near Erzen, Turkey; Kliat, Ahlat, Turkey; Artsa, near Erzurum, Turkey; Mokisus, location uncertain, Turkey; Kilikian and southeastern gates; Tarsus, Tarsus, Turkey; Mopsuestia, Mises, Turkey; Adana, Adana, Turkey; Antioch, Antakya, Turkey; Edessa, Şanlıurfa, Turkey; Hierapolis, Manbij, Syria; Melatin, Malatya, Turkey; the Balkans and Greece, the European core; Thessaloniki, Thessaloniki, Greece; Adrianople, Edirne, Turkey; Philippopol, Plovdiv, Bulgaria; Serdica, Sofia, Bulgaria; Durakium, Durrës, Albania; Corinth, Corinth, Greece; Thebes, Thiva, Greece; Larissa, Larissa, Greece; Napactus, Napactos, Greece; Cherson, Sevastopol, Crimea; Italy and Sicily; Bari, Bari, Italy; Taranto, Taranto, Italy; Reggio, Reggio Calabria, Italy; Catania, Catania, Italy. Islands: Crete, Iraklion, Greece. Cyprus, Nicosia, Cyprus. Rhodes, Greece. Across wide plains and dust-colored mountains came the Seljuk Turks, a powerful dynasty born from Central Asian nomadic tribes. They swept into the Middle East, embraced Islam, and built great states. The most relevant to our story, the Seljuk Sultanate of Rum, which ruled much of Anatolia. They brought with them Turkic warriors, a new cultural identity, new trade routes, and thousands of migrating tribes. Among these tribes were the ancestors of the Ottomans. But the Seljuks, too, would weaken. When the Mongols thundered west, the Seljuk state collapsed, fracturing Anatolia into small, fiercely independent principalities called beyliks. One of these small frontier beyliks was led by the father of Osman. These are the Seljuk cities and states: Isfahan, Iran; Baghdad, Iraq; Rey, near Tehran, Iran; Merv, Mary, Turkmenistan; Nishabur, Iran; Hamadan, Iran. Key cities in the core empire: Samarkand, Uzbekistan; Bukhara, Uzbekistan; Ghazni, Afghanistan; Herat, Afghanistan; Tabriz, Iran; Mosul, Iraq; Aleppo, Syria. Regions of the Great Seljuk Empire: Khorasan, Iran, Turkmenistan, Afghanistan; Persian Iraq, Western and Central Iran; Transoxiana, Uzbekistan, Tajikistan; Al Jazeera, Upper Mesopotamia, North Iraq and Syria; Fars, Southern Iran. Childhood and early life, 1258 to 1280. Born around 1258, precisely as the Mongols consolidated their rule over the Seljuks. They wandered for years before settling in Saut, a small frontier settlement on the very edge of the Seljuk world, facing the weakened Byzantine province of Bithynia. Osman was born into hardship. His tribe, led by his father Ertugrul, had fled war, famine, and collapse. Osman grew up under Ertugrul Ghazi, a respected frontier chief, or a boy's toys were horses, bows, and spears. His grandmother, Jaime Anna, imparted something equally vital: the ancient tribal wisdom of governance. How to settle disputes, how to distribute resources, how to lead through consensus, not just command. But look beyond the tribe. Byzantine merchants visiting Ertugrul's camp brought stories of imperial administration. Seljuk scholars spoke of Persian statecraft. Traveling bards recited tales of Alexander's conquests. All these influences seeped into the young Osman's consciousness. This wasn't mere cultural exchange, it was strategic synthesis. Osman was unconsciously preparing to create something new, a state that could draw from multiple traditions while forging its own identity. When Ertugrul passed, the tribe's elders endorsed Osman, but tribal consensus was just the beginning. Leadership in this complex frontier world required validation from multiple directions. Second-party recognition came quickly. Neighboring Turkic beyliks sent envoys, not just out of respect, but to assess the new leader. Their message was clear: we're watching. Across the border, Byzantine governors conducted their own tests. Raids were launched, diplomacy was probed. When Osman responded with both strength and restraint, they too offered a grudging respect. Even mercenary captains, those barometers of opportunity, began arriving. They weren't just selling swords, they were betting on Osman's future. The prophetic vision, the dream. That moment in Sheikh Edebali's lodge that would become foundational myth. Osman sleeps in the home of the mystic Sheikh Edebali. A surreal dream unfolds. A moon rises from Edebali's chest, floats into Osman's. A massive tree bursts from Osman's heart, its branches spreading across mountains, seas, and continents. Rivers flow beneath it. Cities bloom under its shade. But let's look beyond the legend, to the interpretations. Edebali, the Sufi mystic, saw Islamic destiny in the vision, but he blended it with shamanic symbols familiar to the Turkic tribes. This wasn't just prophecy, it was brilliant intercultural communication. The elders heard their own history in the dream, validation of their long migration, their struggles, their destiny. For them, it wasn't just Osman's dream, it was their tribe's dream. Intriguingly, local Christian monks noted parallels to Emperor Constantine's vision before the Battle of Milvian Bridge. To them, this wasn't alien, it was familiar political theater. The Rise of Osman. The rise of Osman I, 1258-1326, and the birth of the Ottoman state were not isolated events, but the result of a perfect storm of geopolitical vacuums, demographic shifts, and specific policy failures in both the Seljuk and Byzantine empires. Below is an explanation of the primary and secondary factors that connected Osman's childhood and rise to power with the broader events of the late 13th century. Its rise can be attributed to three factors. 1. The Seljuk context, collapse and migration. 2. The Byzantine context, neglect and betrayal. 3. The Ahis and the Seljuk context, collapse and migration. The collapse of the Seljuk Sultanate depended on two factors. 1. The Mongol Onslaught. 2. The Bobai Revolt. The Mongol Onslaught, 12th to 13th centuries. The Seljuk Sultanate, once mighty across Anatolia, the Mongol Empire under Genghis Khan and later Hulagu Khan, expanded westward and invaded Anatolia. At the Battle of Kosadai in 1243, Mongol armies shattered Seljuk authority. The Mongols didn't rule directly, they ruled through fear, taxation, and punitive raids. From that day on, sultans ruled in fear, paying tribute and fighting each other more than their enemies. The empire that once held Anatolia together was now a hollow shell. The weakening of Seljuk control resulted in local Turkish lords acting independently, military commanders deserting the state, tribal migrations towards safer frontier regions, rise of small principalities, Bilecs. Osman's tribe was one of those Bilecs. Why this mattered? There was no centralized power to stop Osman when he rose. Seljuk kings were too busy appeasing Mongols, fighting each other, and trying to stay alive. No one noticed Osman until it was too late. The Bobai Revolt, 1240. A massive religious uprising of Turkmen nomads against the Seljuk elite, led by a mystic named Baba Ishak. The Baba Ishak Revolt, 1239 through 1241, was a major socio-religious uprising in Anatolian Seljuk lands, driven by discontent among Turkmen nomads and frontier peoples against heavy taxes, perceived injustice, and oppressive Seljuk rule. Led by the charismatic preacher Baba Ishak, follower of Baba Ilyas, who gained immense popular support, challenging Persianized Seljuk authority until suppressed by force, weakening the Sultanate before the Mongol invasions. It began around 1239 in southeastern Anatolia and spread rapidly, capturing major cities like Sivas and Kayseri and threatening the capital, Konya. The revolt began in the initially overwhelming local Seljuk forces, showing the central government's inability to control its peripheries. Sultan Gayathuzzin II finally suppressed the rebellion after recruiting Frankish mercenaries and decisively defeating the rebels near Kırşehir, executing Baba Ishak and many followers. the revolt severely weakened the Seljuk Sultanate, making it vulnerable just a few years later. The weakened Seljuks suffered a devastating defeat against the Mongols at the Battle of Kosadai, 1243, leading to Mongol dominance over Anatolia. 2. The Byzantine context, neglect and betrayal. While the Seljuks were crumbling, the Byzantine Empire was inadvertently opening the door for Osman through catastrophic policy changes. The recapture of Constantinople, 1261. In 1261, the Byzantines recaptured Constantinople from the Latins, Crusaders, and moved the capital back there from Nicaea, Islamic. The empire's focus shifted entirely to the Balkans and Europe to defend the new capital. Anatolia was neglected. The Anatolian frontier where Osman lived was suddenly demoted from heartland to backwater. The best Byzantine troops and generals were transferred to Europe, leaving the local defenses near Sogat hollowed out and vulnerable to Osman's raids. Dismantling the Akritai Frontier Guards event. Emperor Michael VIII Palaiologos, needing money to rebuild Constantinople, slashed the funding and tax exemptions for the Akritai, the local peasant militia who had successfully defended the border for centuries. Feeling betrayed by the emperor, many Akritai either stopped fighting or actually defected to the Turks. 3. The Ahis and the Frontier Society. Osman's success wasn't just military, it was social. The Ahi Brotherhoods. These were guild-like fraternities of craftsmen and merchants in Anatolian cities. In the absence of a central state, they provided police, justice, and charity. Connection? Osman married the daughter of Sheikh Edebali, a prominent spiritual leader connected to the Ahis. This marriage was a political masterstroke. It gave the rough, nomadic warrior Osman legitimacy in the eyes of the settled urban merchant class. Result, the Ahis provided the administrative backbone and economic resources the young Ottoman state needed to govern the towns it conquered. Birth of the Empire, July 27, 1302, the plains near Bapheos. This wasn't just another frontier skirmish. This was the moment the Byzantine Empire finally understood. The Ottomans weren't a nuisance, they were an existential threat. While Bapheos was the tipping point, a specific series of successes roughly 3 years prior forced the Byzantines to finally send Musallan's army. The conquest of Bilecik and Yarhisar, circa 1299. Osman managed to capture the key fortress of Bilecik and Yarhisar during a wedding ceremony ambush. This was a masterstroke of stratagem rather than brute force. By taking Bilecik, he secured a major fortified base and, crucially, captured the daughter of the Byzantine governor, Halaferah, whom he married to his son Orhan, later Nilufar Hatun. Siege of Nicaea, Islamic, 1301. Emboldened by taking Bilecik, Osman moved to blockade Nicaea, the former imperial capital. He cut the supply lines, causing famine in the city. It was this direct threat to Nicaea, a city of immense symbolic and strategic value to the Byzantines, that panicked the emperor into dispatching the army that would be destroyed at Bapheos. The location was carefully chosen. Bapheos controlled the land bridge between two major Byzantine cities, Nicomedia to the north, Nicaea to the south. Controlled this, and you've severed Byzantine Anatolia. Byzantine Emperor Andronicus II made a fatal miscalculation. He saw this as another tribal raid. He sent a provincial army, not the elite Tagmata. He was fighting the last war while Osman was inventing the next one. Osman's intelligence network proved superior. Local Greek peasants, disillusioned with Byzantine tax collectors, provided detailed reports on troop movements, supply routes, even commander personalities. Logistics favored the Ottomans. Their supply lines were short. The Byzantine forces were overextended, marching far from their bases. War isn't just about fighting, it's about supplying the fight. Hybrid army, What made Bapheos decisive wasn't numbers, it was innovation. Osman had spent 2 years creating something new, a hybrid army. Light Turkic horse archers, mobile, deadly at distance, combined with heavier Byzantine-style cavalry, armored, devastating in close combat, each compensated for the other's weaknesses. Most revolutionary, former Byzantine soldiers now serving in Ottoman ranks. They brought knowledge of Byzantine tactics, of fortress weaknesses, of command structures. This wasn't just manpower, it was institutional knowledge walking across the frontier. Even the medical corps was innovative for its time. Organized field treatment units, rules for prisoner handling differing by rank, psychological units trained specifically for morale effect. And the communication system? Pre-arranged signals using flags, horns, even smoke. Multiple units could coordinate across miles of battlefield. The Byzantine army still relied on messengers and guesswork. The battle unfolds. Dawn, July 27th. The Ottomans held the high ground. They'd arrived days earlier, rested, prepared. The Byzantines arrived weary from long march. The Byzantine commander deployed in classic formation. Heavy infantry center, cavalry wings. Textbook, predictable. Then came the feigned retreat, a classic nomadic tactic, but executed with new precision. Not chaotic flight, but controlled withdrawal, drawing the Byzantine cavalry forward, breaking their formation, isolating them. The timing was perfect. Midday, Byzantine troops fatigued, afternoon wind blowing dust toward their lines. Then the hidden reserves emerged from wooded areas where Byzantine scouts had reported nothing. Pre-arranged signals coordinated the attack from multiple directions simultaneously. The Byzantine command structure couldn't respond. Confusion became panic. Panic became rout. Most telling, the Ottoman pursuit was disciplined. No wild chase into potential ambush. Controlled advance, securing the field, collecting prisoners and equipment systematically. The aftermath. The scale of the victory was shocking. An entire Byzantine field army destroyed, not just defeated, annihilated as a fighting force. Strategically, everything changed. The region between Nicaea and Nicaea was now Ottoman. 2 major Byzantine cities were isolated, vulnerable. The psychological impact was perhaps greater than the territorial. In Constantinople, the realization dawned. This wasn't a frontier problem, this was an existential threat. The perception shifted permanently from tribal nuisance to rising empire. Regionally, neighboring Turkic beyliks recalibrated. Those who had watched neutrally now sought alliance. The balance of power had shifted irrevocably. And the human capital. Experienced Byzantine soldiers began defecting. They brought not just military skills, but knowledge of fortifications, of siegecraft, of command structures. This wasn't just manpower, it was institutional knowledge walking across the frontier. Even the medical corps was innovative for its time. Organized field treatment units, rules for prisoner handling differing by rank, psychological units trained specifically for morale effect. And the communication system? Pre-arranged signals using flags, horns, even smoke. Multiple units could coordinate across miles of battlefield. The Byzantine army still relied on messengers and guesswork. Epilogue. The psychological impact resonated for decades. Byzantine field armies became increasingly reluctant to engage Ottomans in open battle. Cities began surrendering without sieges. But perhaps the greatest legacy was institutional. Bapheos forced the Ottomans to professionalize, to systematize, to think not just as warriors, but as military engineers, logisticians, strategists. This wasn't just a battle won, it was a military doctrine born, a doctrine that would carry Ottoman armies to Vienna's gates, that would dominate 3 continents for centuries.